All right, recording has begun. Welcome everybody. Tonight we have Joel and William from Panthenators leading our discussion tonight. So I'm going to let you guys roll with it. The floor is yours. Take it away.
All right, I'll get us started out then. So hello, I'm William from 8234 Panthenators. And I'm joined with two other members if they want to introduce themselves.
Yeah, I'm Joel Shervin from the Panthenators, Drive Team Lead.
I'm Jonas Grill from the Panthenators. I'm Co-Team Lead.
All right, so then we've recently been going along our journey of discovering what is scouting, how do we want to scout, and we still have a long way to go with that. So in this meeting tonight, we're hoping to share some of the things that we have learned along with learning from other teams. So we have some questions that we are just kind of over discussion questions we have created. So our first one is, how does your team determine what's important to scout in a given game?
I guess I can start. Dominic here from 2491 No Mythic. We actually really start at kickoff. We have a pretty long and extensive kickoff schedule as a team. And part of that is sort of breaking down the game, seeing what are the ways of scoring, what are the ways of de-scoring your opponents, what are the different ways of ranking points. And then from that, we have a smaller section of the team that goes off and they're like, okay, here's the data we want to collect, and sort of here's how we want to do that. And it's very preliminary. I know that was how we did it last year. And I think part of the improvements that we're planning on making this year is also sort of figuring out, working more on like developing the scouting system earlier, because that was a big thing last year that we had issues with.
I'll also add to that. I think one of the advantages of doing that, because that was a sort of new thing last year that we just implemented into kickoff last year. And one of the difficulties that we've had with kickoff is we, like similar to a lot of teams, we have an operations hub team that's like what some teams may call like a business hub team. I'm our operations captain, and we have this like cohort of students that does not really work on coding or building at all and just focuses on like outreach and sponsor relations and all the different types of work to keep our team afloat and make sure we have the resources we need. And so one of the difficulties that we've had a lot with kickoff is making sure that everyone on our team, and I think those students in particular, can stay engaged when we have, our kickoff is usually 2 days long. And when we have all, usually around like 18 hours of that devoted to breaking down the game, it can be really hard to keep everyone engaged for that long. And that's, I think, an advantage of implementing that system, that like we, as Dominic says, we are able to, just get started right at kickoff, which has been really helpful for us, but also like we're able to keep some of the students engaged and sort of like encourage them to look at the game rules through the lens of like scouting and something that is a little bit less related to like the building and coding of the robot.
We also have like a really similar kind of operations side. We have like several sub teams that are more focused on that. And our kickoff is like officially just one like full day with the whole team. And I think it's really difficult when you have like a bigger team to kind of just wrap it all up together, because once we watch the game video, we read the manual all together. And I think it's a little kind of a free-for-all at first. And I think it's just kind of hard to...
We're almost certainly redoing almost all of
Yeah.
our kickoff for this next year. So I might actually be running a roundtable on that later.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of just like when you have some people more devoted to, coding and then building, and other people more devoted to like business and marketing, that's really difficult to kind of like just gather everyone's ideas, because obviously some people will have more ideas at first than others. Yeah. Any thoughts? Yeah.
I'll say for KnightKrawler, we have a pretty similar process with breaking down the game manual and spending a lot of time that day going through game analysis. But we do a human player simulation, and that allows us, we've transitioned for that to really be focused on robot archetypes. So whether that's a high scoring robot or a defense robot, and that really allows us to see what different types of robots are going to play against each other. So if you have an alliance that's 2 high scorers and a low scorer, what is that going to do? And while that's also helpful for design process, it comes up in scouting and determining what we want our alliance strategy to be later down the line. So that can be really helpful to implement as well.
All right. And then so after you've determined kind of during your kickoff kind of what's important to scout, um, what is like your kind of process of like actually at a competition, going to like either like pit scouting, going team to team, or like during matches gathering information? How does your team do that? Joseph?
Yeah, so we are we're pretty unique, and we have sort of tried out this new system the past couple of years, where we actually do something called a scouting alliance. We would encourage a lot of other teams to. It's been really helpful for us, and we would encourage other teams to consider this. But we have we've in past years we have sort of we've had scouting shifts set up where we have like usually around 9 students on our team just do scouting for the entire competition. And because we have sorry, I think I'm being called for dinner. Dominic, do you want to take this?
Yeah, so we work with typically between 1 to 3 other teams at competitions. And so that instead of having all 6 students coming from No Mythic constantly, we have maybe 2 students from Windchill, a student from the Robettes, 2 students from Emperors, and 1 student from No Mythic or whatever. And so that really helps sort of distribute the workload really well. And then with pit scouting, we last year at least we did it solely as one team. I think we had like 4 students sort of divvy them up in pairs. We basically took the pit map and just sliced it in half. And we basically said, here you go. Here's all the teams you need to scout. Here's a questionnaire. And then get it to us by Friday night when we need the pick list done. So that was pretty much what we did. We used Google Forms and Google Sheets, which worked pretty well. I don't know what other teams use.
I just realized I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Bonnie Dung from Talon. I'm head of scouting and strategy. So I remember this season, it was very similar, and technically we used like a Google form questionnaire, and we had like almost everyone that signed up for the event do scouting in the pits. We like separated them into teams of like 3 to 4, and that kind of just gives them more of like a set of like questions that they should like follow. But I think it's also interesting like what ideas and what like observations that everyone makes, because for 10K, like I think like the second day or like after, we have kind of like everyone stays behind in our room here. We have like a little dinner, but we also have like a scouting discussion after. So we hear what everyone's like top teams are, what kind of robots they found interesting, and that kind of like ties up the scouting for 10K together, because we get to hear everyone's opinions, not just scouting.
You should talk about match
Well,
scouting as well.
One thing we found for pit scouting is that if you ask questions that are hard answers, like how much your robot weighs, what your drivetrain is, or if you ask what people can't do, you tend to get better, more accurate answers, because everybody can score everything in auto. So, but if somebody says they can't do something, they really probably can't do it. So, and it's useful to know that stuff.
For match scouting, we also did a scouting alliance last year. I believe that worked well.
It worked pretty well. We were with Stampede and the Islanders from DLSL, so.
It was better than the team we did with Worlds a few years ago.
Yeah, it didn't work so great with the Regal Eagles.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly makes scouting less stressful.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in. I'm gonna make probably one more comment, then I'm probably gonna have to head out. But so we also do a sort of scouting debrief once per competition, and it's for us it's an optional meeting. It's usually like pretty late on Friday night or like the second night of competitions, or right before the night before Alliance elections, which can be different for depending on the competition you go to. But we have that be an optional meeting, and then we bring basically all of the data that we've collected over the past 2 days into that meeting, and we have people like we have like usually one person who's really good at like breaking down these statistics and all of the organizing the sheet in a very like visually understandable way, and we're able to like break that down and then determine a pick list based off of all of the data that we've collected throughout the competition. I'll also say, sort of returning to some of the other advantages of like some of the processes which are obviously still constantly being improved, but I do think I just want to say that I think we talk a lot about like the value of scouting in terms of like how it benefits the team and how they place at a competition, and I think that is a really big part of scouting, and I think we should be focusing on that a lot. But I do also want to say that there is a lot of there's a lot to be said about the ways in which scouting can sort of help to build connections between other teams. I mentioned our scouting alliance. That's been we've built and strengthened so many connections with other teams in our FRC, in the St. Paul FRC community through that. Especially when we've gone to Worlds, we've like reached out to other teams in our division that like we haven't really interacted with before, and we've asked them to join our scouting alliance, and then we're able to sort of create these really strong bonds between our teams. But there's also through pit scouting, you're able to sort of encourage the students that are doing pit scouting to like really like reach out and encourage. Like I know our pit scouting forum last year asked, we asked these questions about the robot, and what are some cool things about your robot, and how much does your robot weigh, and all these more like questions that like try to answer the more like statistical parts of scouting. But we also we included some questions on our forum. Dominic, you might remember these better than I do, but we just included some like fun questions about like what's your robot's name, or like what's something fun about your team. Or I don't think it was on the forum, but we have a scouting lead who is just very much so a people person, and would always like ask people like, what's your favorite color, or all these like just sort of fun questions that help to build these relationships between these students that are doing pit scouting, and hopefully between these teams that we're scouting. And I do think it's important to think about that and really encourage your students to sort of through this process keep building those connections and relationships. But with that, I have to head out. Thank you.
So a question for the teams that do that kind of a scouting alliance, is that mainly because you don't have enough people, or is it because just to distribute workload so people aren't scouting the whole competition?
I know for us, like this year we have 31 students. So we definitely could be scouting the entire time. But we have found that, especially for some students on the team, it can be really hard to be that focused for extended periods of time. And so we end up scheduling it so that one single person isn't scouting for more than maybe half an hour to an hour. And then they get to take a break for, 30 minutes and explore the competition or whatever. And we found that's really helpful. And it can also help with some students which might see scouting as more of like sort of like a job, or like, oh, I have to go scout now, where they don't have to do as much of it if they don't want to. And I think that really helps.
Okay, I don't know why I put my hand down for a second. Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. I was not prepared to answer this question. Anyway, so what we're going to say is that we strongly recommend if you're going to do a scouting alliance, that you have connections with those teams. A lot of why we did it last year is we got asked to join the scouting alliance. And it was great for taking workload off of people. I'm sure we got better scouting data because of it.
But yeah, one year at Worlds, we met with a team that asked on Chief Delphi to Scouting Alliance, and they instantly crashed to the bottom of the standings and stopped caring about halfway through the first day. So it didn't go very well. So, I mean, and they were a team that, they're from New York. They're never going to see us again. So they didn't really feel like they had to talk to us. So it didn't go well. So.
Yeah, we had similar experiences last year as well with that. And I think it was just it's really helpful to have a personal connection with even just one or two students on that team that you can sort of hold them accountable, being like, hey, we're friends. Can you rally your team to do this and actually care about it? And so sort of reaching out over, Instagram or Discord or wherever you can get connections. And I think that's really helpful that, just scouting with a random team isn't going to be helpful. And so really, and then you can use that once you have that to strengthen the bond you have with teams and sort of really integrate those two teams together. I know we did one with the Robettes, and our mentors are really close friends, and it's really helped our students really get really good connections.
All right. And so I've heard people talk about when they're taking data, some people have Google Form and stuff. But has anybody here has their team developed an app that they use?
Okay. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt him. Talent personally, I think a lot of people have had the passion to make a scouting app. So we did have one because for scouting during matches, we give our teammates these Amazon Fire tablets, and we have the app installed there. So I think it's just really more entertaining than just sitting there maybe with a piece of paper and a pen to just see they can pick cones up high or they only do cones low.
A lot easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a student in 2020 that really looked at Citrus Circuits as spec for their app, and he wrote his own based off of that, and we've been kind of using that and stuff.
Ours is in our GitHub too.
Yeah, it's in our GitHub. So
Yeah.
assuming we can get to our GitHub.
Yeah. Yeah, we are aiming to do maybe a new app for the next game, and we tried to kind of circulate it.
Yeah, KnightKrawler has FRC Crawler, which is available for other teams to use as well, and we find it really helpful from the standpoint of ensuring essentially a same standard of data across all of our scouts and all of the days. So, and I really like it because we can change it for each game, and also it has a pit scouting mode, which is super great. So if we have a student who wants to go pit scout and not use a notebook, they can use their phone and go do that. But I would also say that we do encourage our students who are really passionate about scouting. Like, yes, you have your shift with the tablet and you can do it there, but also we get a lot of qualitative data through notebook scouting and students who just really enjoy the process of sitting and watching and recording things. And sometimes the comments that they have are better than the ones that come from the apps in terms of like, oh, it seems like their robot's broken a lot recently, or, it might be very tippy, things like that can be really helpful. So I think there's room for a balance of both. Honestly, for us, one of the biggest reasons that the app is good is because the data comes out as a CSV. So it means that when we do our strategy meeting, it's really easy to just sort by team number, find an average of number of match pieces. I see teams who do it on paper, and I have a lot of respect because I know that must take a lot of work. So just in terms of efficiency, using the app can be really helpful.
I'm going to jump in and say a few more things about FRC Crawler. FRC Crawler has been in the Google Play Store for, I'm going to say almost a decade, because I'm on my 9th year in the team, and it was done prior to me joining. So it's been in Google Play for a decade, and it gets updates every now and again when we need to update it. And you can find info on how to use it on team2052.com. The other thing that I think is really important about FRC Crawler is that it syncs all this data via Bluetooth, so you don't have to have a cellular data chip in your tablets, and you don't have to be on Wi-Fi. I wonder, I'm curious to see if FIRST starts cracking down, because there's a ton of scouting systems that are online scouting systems. And having watched champs remotely this year, the announcer, like every other match, was telling people to turn off their hotspots. But I'm confident they were all turned on because people are using online scouting applications and needed to have a data connection. And it seemed like it was badly impacting the fields, and people refused to turn off their hotspots because then they would not be able to scout. So I think FRC Crawler is unique in that way, in that it's 100% offline, and the data syncs between the main tablet and the scout tablets via Bluetooth, so that you don't break the rules and have a hotspot.
I know our team, we use Google Form and Google Sheet, which is online. And we just have students do it on their phone. Either, I know at regional, sometimes there are Wi-Fi, just public, otherwise using mobile data. And we did have one issue at Houston down at Worlds and then we had backup laminated paper sheets that people would just take a photo of after every match. And then whenever like Joseph had a break or whatever, he would go exit the, competition area, go into the hallway or whatever, and submit that way. And that worked pretty well as just like a backup. One thing that we have found really helpful with our online system is that we can actually pull from FIRST some of the data from matches, so we can get sort of the final scores from the FRC events page. I know some teams have integrated Statbotics into their system, so then they can pull out different stats that you wouldn't be able to do necessarily as easily when you're offline. And I think that's been really helpful. Also, like as Lexi was saying, the ability to sort of visualize the data different ways. I know last year we had a really strong algorithm to calculate match predictions, and we were accurate probably 80 to 90% of the time of what teams would win. And that was really cool to see. And we could use that data going into strategy meetings with our alliance partners and being like, hey, we notice you haven't been doing this well on such and such particular task. Can we do it for you instead? Our data shows you doing it 30% of the time. Our data shows that we're doing it 90% of the time. And sort of going into that strategy meeting with some sort of confidence of this is our data and it should agree with your data, and having that sort of quantitative like foundation that you can use as sort of leverage in those conversations to get some sort of respect.
I think that's a good time to segue. We're currently working on our own app. We have some questions related to that. So our app is currently working over Bluetooth, and I think Joel do you have any like questions about the design side of it, since that's kind of what you're working on?
So we kind of just started this working on this app as kind of like just for fun. We kind of wanted to. We haven't done a lot of scouting. Obviously, this is our second year or second actual competition, so we don't know as much about it. But we had this really cool class opportunity to just kind of make an app for our language arts credit. So me, Jonas, and one of our other team members were just kind of like, let's make a scouting app because we get language arts credit for it, and why not? It's robotics related, so it'll be fun. So we kind of just started and set off by, looking at other teams' designs and kind of just making it, the goal is to make it as reusable over the years. So we kind of just make it once, we'll still update it and everything, but having like built-in form builders connecting with other things like StatBotics and like maybe Blue Alliance or the first API and everything like that. So it's most integrated with everything else. And then Jonas has been working on the Bluetooth side of things while I've been kind of mocking up all the looks of everything. But let's see. As for like some questions and stuff, what are your like biggest challenges with your scouting, and what like do you like or don't like about your processes right now? As something we're looking at right now to see what we can improve upon. So what are some things you like and don't like about your current scouting process?
I will say that over the years from KnightKrawler, one of the things that I've heard repeatedly from our person who is on the field choosing an alliance or leading the strategy meeting or in charge of scouting data, they will often say, we need students to fill out better comments. And so we want all the statistical data of, how many times they scored and high, low, are they a good, rate they're driving on a scale of 1 to 5 or whatever the metrics might be. But our students follow a specific robot for the whole match. And what we hope for them to do is to write 1 or 2 kind of bullet points or phrases or sentences about the match, because if they got knocked over by another robot and therefore had a really bad match, someone should make a note saying, hey, they did poorly in this match because somebody screamed across the field in auto and knocked them over and they couldn't do anything. So that's one of the things it's hard, I think, to encourage students to do, especially your students who are sort of new to FRC and they're might be their first year and they don't kind of understand the value of the data and why do I have to do this? This isn't fun. I don't like doing this. Getting those new people to enter evaluational comments about a match or about the robot, I think is a hard thing to do. I don't know how you address that in an app, unless you just basically require a comment to be entered and maybe so long, but that's only as good as convincing the person that it's important. So Um, from an app design perspective, finding ways to encourage that, I would say, would be of emphasis or a focus. How to solve that problem, I don't have great advice on that. That's sort of a people issue, not a software issue.
Yeah, so for our app, after they've finished all the scouting the game, we do have like little comment boxes about the robot specifically and then about the match, which I also think is interesting because if someone is watching one robot for the whole time, there's not that good of a chance that they're noticing the game as like a whole. So it's really interesting, especially for newer people, because like they've been introduced to the game. If they're freshmen or something, they've been introduced like maybe like a week before. So it's kind of difficult for these newer teammates to kind of really notice everything, which I think is more maybe just experience. But we do try to encourage people to have their own opinions more about matches. And it's more for off season. We really try to emphasize that part of match scouting just so they can get that experience of watching matches and noticing really important things.
Yeah, I know one thing that we do is we really try and invite and welcome scouters into that final strategy discussion and pick list meeting. And we also have our pit scouts take photos of every robot at the competition. And so then when we're talking about a specific team, let's say like 2052, we can pull up their robot and be like, here's this robot. Scouters, do you remember anything important we should take into consideration with this robot, as well as looking at the stats? And part of that is just like trying to remember over the past like 2 days or whatever what you've seen from 60 robots. But I think when you see a robot that really stands out, you definitely like keep it in your mind. And I think that's also where the comments can bring in, like, oh yeah, I did say that about this robot. Here's what I meant. Even if it's just like a bullet point, sort of having your scouters in your strategy meeting to sort of elaborate on some of the comments made can be helpful.
I'll say the first year that I went to competition, part of my job pit scouting was I literally walked through the entire pits at Duluth and took a picture of every robot and just uploaded them to the Google Drive, which ended up being really helpful in our strategy meeting. So I definitely echo that. Dominic, and from the perspective of if we're doing our strategy meetings, the second night, we love to go back for the robots that we're on the fence about. We'd love to come back the next day and gather some more data. So either really specifically watch those ones or go and talk to them and be like, okay, here's your reminder of what the robot looks like. Here's some, specific questions that we had, and like go back and talk to them. And so I think also for our students who maybe are more visual learners, or that's the way that they think through things, that can be really helpful as well.
I can give you maybe some general app design stuff. I'm a mobile app developer in my life outside of robotics. And so I think trying to get as much as you can on a single screen so you don't have to scroll, at least maybe not scroll too far, is good. Keeping data collection as simple as possible. Anything you can do with a slider or an up-down arrow versus entering with a keyboard, that'll keep the scout's eyes on the field and lessen the tablet or the phone. There's just some generic usability things that are fairly common if you're accustomed to building apps that might be new to you if you're building an app. But you want to make things as visually easy, make big touch targets. So if your plan is to use your finger and make the touch targets big so that's easy for them to kind of grab that slider, hit those up-down arrows. Easy for them to, if someone scores, to be able to find the scoring section and be able to enter whether it was a high goal or a low goal and add +1 or if they mess up, and that'll happen too. How do I take the one away because I actually added it to the wrong field? Think about kind of how someone's going to be moving their eyes and moving their finger in filling out your app. That's probably the best advice I can give you is in terms of layout to just general app design. If you have to scroll more than a full page, like if you had to scroll 2 pages, I think you're collecting too much data. And I think your overall data will suffer because you're trying to collect too much data. No right or wrong answer there, but just some general things to think about as you're building your app.
And I think with that, something that can be really helpful, at least for us, is week 0 being like, here's our preliminary draft of our scouting system. Scouters, go watch a few matches, fill out some practice data, give us feedback. What wasn't working well? What was working really well? And then after week 0 coming in and being like, okay, here's the feedback we got. How can we adjust it to make it better? And we do that after competitions as well, being like, all right, here's the data that we used a bunch. Here's the data we didn't use at all. And sort of streamlining the process to be like, this is the best scouting system by the end of the season.
This is kind of aside from the app as of now, but when you're talking about match scouting, what does your process kind of look like? I know when looking to other apps, and specifically reading the Citrus Circuits document, they had one person scouting each team during the matches and one doing the whole, or each robot, if that makes sense. So one per robot and then one per team. Is that something you guys implement, or how does your match scouting process look?
When you say team, are you talking about the alliance?
Yeah, sorry. The
alliance. So that's 8 scouts. So 6 for robots and 1 for each alliance. Did I understand that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
I can start. So for us, we have 6 students and a scouting lead, and also a backup. So we just basically have 1 student per robot, and they actually, as matches change, right, we go from one to the next, they watch a specific position on the field. So they'll be like, whatever robot starts, furthest left, like that's the one that I'm going to track. Sometimes we also do it based on LED display over the driver station. It really just depends the view that we have and what's going to be easier. So we'll have 1 student track a specific robot for each match. And that's mostly it. Key to that is we do not record win or loss in our scouting data. There's a lot of outside factors that can contribute to whether a specific robot on an alliance wins or loses. So it's just not something that we track very much. And then the scouting lead is there just to organize things, and the backup person is there if somebody needs to run out and take a lap or get a drink of water, whatever.
It's gonna be a little bit of sound. We just finished with our fundraising event. But basically we have about 6 tablets. We have an extra one for scouting lead. And they specifically have like blue 1, red 1 assigned to them, which you can see if you just go up and look at the tablet description. So basically, similar to KnightKrawler, someone is specifically looking at one spot, one robot, which I think is still really important, which we kind of try to emphasize, just kind of watch the whole match too. We use that for match scouting for quantitative data.
Well, and then the lead's watching the match.
Yeah.
So they'll get some information.
Right.
Obviously, they're not watching like one specific alliance or the other, but they can give more about what happened in the match overall.
And usually we have more people in the stands than we have tablets, so it's more that we have a lot more people just noticing the match while they're watching from the stands. So in that case, they're usually doing their own observations with whatever material they're using.
So the question I'll ask then is, what is the most important thing your team has learned about scouting over the years?
Right. I think one of the things we've learned is to basically always be scouting. I mean, you're always trying to learn more and more about the teams that you're going to be with, and that. The other thing is remember, everything's got a pretty big error bar. I know when we started collecting data, people would worry, well, it's 50, these guys are scoring 5.1 versus 5.2, and you're like realizing that's one object over 10 matches. The next match, they're equivalently the same. So remember that there's kind of a big error bar on everything, and so I guess that's kind of the biggest thing I've learned.
I think what I've observed from KnightKrawler's strategy meetings, and the mentors for KnightKrawler don't usually get involved with the strategy meetings. That's historically has been all student led. Now, coming out of COVID, with basically 2 years of no scouting, and all of our scouting experience had basically gone away, we did bring mentors back into the fold to kind of teach the team how to do strategy meeting again. But at this point, I think it'll probably roll back to it's a student thing. And every now and again, the mentors will pop into the room and say, how's it going? Or, have any thoughts or questions that you want to bounce off of us? And I think what I've observed probably the most that I think is a good takeaway for this group is that the scouting data you collect in the stands is a way to sort teams into basically 3 buckets of 100% would take them or accept. These are good candidates for us, a first or second pick. These are teams that aren't a good fit for us. And then what happens in the strategy meeting is all about the notes that were taken, the observations, the paper scouting, the pit scouting. And it's so the scouting data you collect in the stands, I personally feel like that's really just a way to broadly sort people into a couple of categories. And then it's all about the conversation of what people observed and what notes they took, or I talked to this team and they were telling me this. That's my opinion. Lexi, you can tell me if I'm totally off a base on that.
No, you were actually okay. I was thinking about that too. And we color coordinate teams and we go through and we're like, this is like absolutely and things like that. But I will say, being the person for our team who stands down on the field, and just from that role, what I've seen has been really important is you always need more teams on your pick list than you think you need. Nothing is more terrifying than going down there and being like, oh no, the list is like empty or almost empty. That's a terrifying feeling. We don't want to be the person who's like furiously, slacking or texting somebody on the field. So you always have more than you need. And the other thing is with that, you never know what the half a day before alliance selection is going to bring you. So you might have had like quite a few middle list robots and then a bunch of them break and you're like, oh no. So having, not only do we have margins of error in our data, but like having margins of error in your pick list, super important.
Yeah, I also think going off of that, sort of also thinking like teams might have one bad match and then they fix the robot after it breaks or whatever. And then they suddenly are back up. And I think thinking about like, that's really helpful for breaking down match by match and being like, oh, there was one bad match where the robot broke immediately or they had to be e-stopped. And that might super mess up the averages. Like you only have 10 data points. And so one tool that we've been using is Tableau. It basically takes our data and it looks at different data points over time. And so we can see trends, which has been really helpful. So we can be like, oh, at the start of the competition, they weren't scoring very well. And maybe that was they didn't have much drivers practice. But by the end of the event, they were scoring super, super well. And so sort of seeing that and being like, oh, they had one match where they dipped really far low. But then the next match, they were right back up to where we expected them to be. And I think that's been really helpful to see. And also then talking with those teams, being like, oh, your robot broke. And then going to their pit and being like, so when do you think your robot will be fixed? Or like maybe their robot won't be fixed. I know that was a big thing at our Minneapolis competition where we were like, we don't know. And so really having that sort of communication with the team itself is also really helpful, which I think Lexi was sort of talking about as well.
Dominic, I want to pile on top of that comment. I suspect all of us who have been to competitions more than a couple have witnessed a team who it took them half the day to figure out that they had a bad gyro or they had a loose wire on an encoder or something like that. And they may have done terribly for the first 3 or 4 or even 5 matches. And then they just destroy the field for their final matches because they found the thing that was plaguing them that whole match, which is something else I should have said earlier. But for KnightKrawler, and again, Lexi, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you guys go through every single team and say, does anyone have any thoughts on this team? Even if their stats are at the bottom. And sometimes it's like, nope, okay, that's fine. And so we keep them at the bottom of our list because they just had a bad regional. But sometimes it's, oh, I went and talked to them. They had a bad encoder for the first 5 matches of the day. That's why the numbers are so bad. We need to consider them for our top or middle tier, even though their numbers are placing them in the bottom third. So going through every single team, even if it's a really quick of this team, anybody have any comments on the data? And you just verify that the data reflects their performance and not some other weird problem that they ran into that they ended up fixing, but made their numbers look bad.
Yeah, and I think part of that is just trying to have a wide variety of people in the strategy meeting. So like not only do we want, members of our like in-stand scouters to be there, we want our strategy captain to be there, we want experienced team members to be there, but we definitely want our pit scouters to be there because they're people who have gone around and they've talked to teams and they stood with them for 10 minutes and like had a good conversation. I've also found that sometimes having the drive team, as long as they're still getting sleep, can be helpful because sometimes we have situations where there's just like, yeah, it's just hard to work with them. But most of the time it's good to have a wide variety of voices just to kind of say, yeah, like Scott was talking about, like, yes, the stands person might say, yeah, it seems like they were having a really rough day, but the pit scouting person might say, well, actually, they're going to be okay. And so, yeah, doing that and then continuing to follow up as the day progresses. And yeah, I definitely agree.
All right, so I have a question about pick lists. So at 10K last year, we got very lucky with our beginning matches, and there was a point in time where we thought we were going to have to be picking. So we basically just looked at some of the data we had, and we knew that our robot was very slow at picking up cones. So we just said, hey, who's the best? Can we list the best cone bots? So that was just kind of our very basic way of making a pick list. But then what's kind of your process of going through and making a pick list?
Yeah, I'll start. So for KnightKrawler, we, kind of as Scott said, data helps us sort things into buckets. And we also sometimes do take rankings into account in terms of who we have a chance of being able to pick and who we do not have a chance of being able to pick. And so we'll rank teams. Sometimes teams will be blue, meaning, oh my gosh, if we have the chance to pick them, like they are rock star with our strategy, let's do it. Blue also means if for some reason, right now they're ranked higher than us, but if for some reason that changes, like they would also still be a good fit. Then we have green, which is still awesome for our strategy. Definitely that kind of like, if we were captain, this is our first pick category. And that usually looks like a robot who is similar in scoring capabilities to us. So for in a game that looks like we kind of have like a high score and a low score, that would be like a high scoring robot that's pretty consistent on a hopefully a similar tier to us. And then the third pick, and kind of we have it as like a yellow category, is where things get interesting. And that's where that extended discussion might happen more, where you really try and parse like, okay, are they low scoring just because they had some issues, or are they not going to be right for our strategy? And that's actually quick tangent. As somebody who has sat through quite a few strategy meetings and has helped lead them, I think it's important to be intentional with the language that we use when scouting and doing strategy meetings. Like gracious professionalism when we're at competition, yes, but also the thing that I like to tell students, especially ones who are new to this process, is that everybody who's at this competition has worked just as hard as we have. And when we're talking about teams and strategy, one, you never know who's listening. And two, it's important to respect the hard work that they have put in. So that's why I never have students say like yes and no to robots. It's either right for our strategy or not right for our strategy. But anyways, so we'll group robots into those big categories, like absolutely pick right for our strategy and maybe not right for our strategy right now. And then we kind of definitely go line by line, looking at specific matches and looking at game piece averages. So that's where having the Google Sheets is helpful to kind of see, hey, this is average where they were scoring. We'll look at pictures from like of the robot to kind of see their scoring mechanism, and that kind of helps us determine like reliability and things like that. We definitely look for teams that are not likely to break, things like that. Or if they are likely to break, like how well do we know that their like pit crew can repair and things like that, especially because sometimes with double elimination, like you're going to have short times between match turnarounds. So that's important to know. And then in terms of like what I walk onto the field on in my notebook is just a general list. For the blue and green categories, we will rank them. But oftentimes for our third pick or like backup robots, we won't rank them. It's because at that point, it's usually just like what's available. And you don't have unlimited time in your strategy meeting. So kind of like prioritizing those higher stakes picks, those first picks, those second picks. And then, third picks are just solid robots that, will hopefully fit your strategy and work in a pinch. Feel free to add anything else Scott.
I don't have anything to add to that about making a pick list.
So Talon, we do take a lot of things into consideration for a pick list, but I think we try to go more of a route of technicality in how each team's robot is. So like, defensive, offensive, and how it would, match best with our robot. But that's obviously not the only thing, because we try to have varied discussions with even between like mentor and lead, and extending it to like, everyone who was at those tournaments. We try to really have it as a wide variety of opinions. But we try not to be selective.
We also try to make our list on Friday night, and then we'll circle teams that we either want to follow up with on Saturday or see if they've like maybe they were having troubles on Friday and we've noticed that and we want to see how they fix those on Saturday or like that kind of stuff. So we'll do a little bit of rearranging on Saturday, but we try to have it mostly done on Friday.
And for the record, we sort into 3 categories roughly.
Yeah.
Roughly the same as KnightKrawler.
Well, I think maybe something that hasn't been said yet is that every year, I think the second pick is the hardest to get right. Honestly, I think that teams struggle. Tournaments are won and lost based on who they pick up in their second pick. I really think that that's true a lot of times. And every year, the optimal second pick robot changes. Some years, defense, you definitely want a defensive bot as your third alliance partner. Some years, you want a cycle bot. And I think that teams should, when they're making their pick list, they should think about what they would be if they're an alliance captain. If you're not an alliance captain, this becomes less important. But if you end up being an alliance captain, understanding that, hey, we're really good at this, we absolutely have to find a bot that's really good at this thing to be our to complement each other the most. And then your next pick needs to be a cycle bot or a defense bot or somebody who can do this climb super fast or whatever the game might lead to. And that doesn't always work out because you might say we need to get another high scoring top shooters, high goal shooter for our first pick. And then it turns out that everyone passes over this amazing robot that does everything else better than anyone else. They just don't score high. And you might pick them up and now you got to sort of figure out how to adjust for your third pick. But I think it's important when you build your pick list to understand the strategy of what kind of robots are going to complement your robot the best for your first pick, and then what you need to round out a well-balanced alliance in your second pick. And I don't know that anyone's really talked about the strategy of organizing your pick list, but I think that's important.
Yeah, I was just gonna comment also, at least from my experience, last year No Mythic was in like the mid-20s in ranking. So we went into our pick list meeting be like, oh wait, we're not picking this year. And we were fine with that. We just had, unfortunate malfunctions with our robot, or unlucky like matches or whatever. And so we really went in to, the top 10 or top 15 teams Friday night being like, okay, do they, I guess, deserve to be ranked where they are? Are they a really great robot that is really consistent getting those 3 or 4 ranking points? Or are they just lucky with their matches? Are they being placed with good teams consistently? And being like, okay, here are the 5 teams we want to talk with on Saturday morning, being like, here's the great parts of our robot and why we work well with you. And then sort of skipping over those teams where we aren't necessarily sure that we want to be picked by them. And sort of figuring out, okay, we're not picking, who do we want to be picked by? And sort of really diving deep into those, like, well, we obviously want to be picked by the first alliance, because theoretically they should be the best, but not necessarily are they the best team there. There might be a team that is even better than them, but ranked below them. And I think that's an important part to think about, even if you're not picking.
Dominic, you bring up something I want to share as a story that's sort of what if you're not an alliance captain. A young team, and I won't say who they were, but a young team, I talked to their lead mentor a fair bit, and he said to me one time that this past year was sort of an eye-opening experience for his team, because the team just wants to be one of those teams that, like, hey, we need to be better at doing all the things. And all the things is a dangerous thing for a lot of robotics teams, especially if you're a small team or you're an under-resourced team or a new team. Trying to do all the things is tantalizing to want to do that. And he said, I think a lot of my students realized this year that if we had focused on being a fast, low-scoring cycle bot, we definitely would have been picked to be in the playoffs. And we've never been picked to be in the playoffs. And I think he said, I think a lot of my students realized that maybe our strategy shouldn't be to score as many points as we can score. Maybe our strategy should be the best second pick robot on the field. And that was really intriguing. And I think it's a great strategy for teams that don't have a lot of students. They can't meet 5 days a week. They don't have a lot of cash to buy swerve modules or the biggest, fanciest motors or whatever, or they just don't have a lot of experience. To change that strategy to a strategy of how do we become the best third robot on an alliance so that we guarantee somebody will pick us up. I think that's a really interesting strategy, but it takes a good understanding of what we're all talking about here in terms of what are teams looking for, how are they ranking their robots, how are they building their pick list. I think it's a great strategy, and I think too many times teams just try to be the best individual robot that they can be, rather than focusing on how do we be the most complementary robot on an alliance.
Yeah, I was gonna say when we've gone to Worlds, and there's been some times where we're not, it always helps to go through try and develop a pick list to see actually where you stand and where you really think you are, because it helps you understand what's going on in the draft. So you're like saying, okay, we need to see this team or this team get drafted before we have a chance of even being drafted, and it kind of puts you kind of puts your expectations, I think, better. So even if you're not drafting, I think it's a good idea to go through and see how deep the draft is, because you can get a good feel if you're in the top 24 or if you're really sitting around 30th. So
I think John's saying is that who else puts themselves on your pick list where you think you belong.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna make a comment on what Scott said there. So that for a lot of teams, that's a very good way to go, but that depends entirely on your goals for the season. It depends entirely on all sorts of things, right? And a lot of that's decided at kickoff. So that gets into game analysis, that gets into strategic design. That's 3 more topics on its own.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that in 2019, that was Deep Space. Yeah, right, Deep Space. We were at Champs, and that was the last time we made it to Einstein. And we were in this mindset of how do we become the most complementary second pick robot, third robot in the field. And we realized that the last 3 matches of the day, we needed to play defense. We needed because we had been scoring the entire tournament, and we needed to see other teams watch us play defense. And so that's also an interesting strategy for playing the game, understanding what are scouts looking for, is that was a year where having a defensive bot as your second pick was a really smart strategy. And so we knew that if we wanted to get picked up by an alliance, because we weren't in the top 12 or even 15, or I don't even remember, if we wanted to get picked up as a second pick, we needed to show teams that we could play really good defense. And it worked, and we played every match. That was the first year they did round robin, and we played all 5 matches on the field, and we played defense, and we made it to Einstein and played defense on Einstein. Something that you almost never see KnightKrawler do. You almost never see KnightKrawler play defense, but we knew that was our best shot at getting picked up on an alliance.
Lexi talked about being the person down on the field for being an alliance captain, but it's also important, if you know that you're probably going to be a first pick, to have a good list while you're down there as well. And not only a list of what you're looking for, but knowing your own robot really well so that you can work with your alliance captain and say, okay, this is what you can do. This is what we can do. This is what we need. And these are the robots that we've seen that would complement the 2 of us, as opposed to picking another one that does the exact same thing. Because that happened to us a couple of years ago, where our alliance captain was a defensive bot. We were not a defensive bot, and we picked another defensive bot. So we had 2 defensive bots and 1 scoring bot, and that really hamstrung our alliance. So knowing the capabilities of the 2 robots you've already got and what you need for that third robot to communicate that with your alliance captain.
All right, so I've got a question for everyone. How does everyone motivate their scouts to say, like, see that this is important and make sure that they're giving good data or giving data at all in some cases?
I've got a story I was holding that I want to share, and it's less about motivating scouts and more about motivating students. And if you guys go back, there was a scouting recording from March, April last year. So if you dig back to the playlist for the roundtables, you'll find this. But we started something in Duluth last year, and we did it for all the rest of our competitions. Well, I don't remember if we did it for champs, but what we did is we told students that it wasn't fantasy. Ian is on the call. Ian created a fantasy robotics app, and I would like Ian to talk about it. But we created pick the 24 robots you think will be on the field for final or for playoffs. And whatever student gets the most out of the 24 teams correct gets a case of Mountain Dew. And so that strongly motivated students, because what student doesn't want a case of Flamin' Hot Cheetos Mountain Dew or whatever it is that the kids are drinking now? But what was great about that is that kids suddenly really, really cared. And if they weren't scouting, they were probably paper scouting because they were trying to get the most correct answers for what are the 24 teams that'll be in playoffs. And so the idea that you can create a game out of watching the Alliance and paying attention and taking notes, I think is a really good motivator. We saw that work with several of our students, and they would go through the pits and they would talk to the teams and kind of like as if they were doing Alliance selection, but they were going to do it 24 times because they had to pick 24 teams. And then Ian, I hope he's paying attention here. I saw he joined, but he created.
I'm paying attention.
He painted a fantasy FRC as a result of that, and posted it on Chief Delphi and everything. And that too got fewer students interested in it because it's harder than just doing a pick. But the ones that did do it, man, did they pay attention? So you asked about motivation. I feel like making a game out of scouting, even when it's not your job to scout, can be a great way to motivate students.
Yeah, I think the single event fantasy first, it was hard. I think the barrier to get involved was a bit higher than I would have liked it to be. And I think that's something I'm working on to improve in the future, and the entire system not crashing at champs because I had not tested it and tried to run it 8 instances of it at once. So that didn't work. But basically the concept of it was that you had to pick teams of differing. It used EPA as the metric, which is expected points added. And then you had to, based on that, you had to basically form an alliance where you, kind of like you could only have certain amounts of EPA. So you could only have like one robot that had like 50 EPA or higher. So that meant, for that robot, you had to pick which of these robots do you think is going to be the alliance captain of the winning alliance. Then you also had to pick a couple of the mid-tier robots. Which do you think are going to be the first pick, or which ones do you think are going to go Farm Plus? And then you also had to pick some robots of lower EPA. And basically the whole goal of that was, you had to basically guess who the second pick of the winning alliance would be. And I think that really got you to start thinking about the strategy of the game of like what is needed in an alliance. And because the way it was scored based on how many district points each team would have earned. It really incentivized if the people who, guessed correctly the second pick of the winning alliance were the people who won it all, because, everyone guessed at 10,000 Lakes that KnightKrawler or Patriotics was going to, be first seed captain, and so that one was kind of a solid guess. And then the middles kind of varied a little bit, and the points there did differentiate the winner. But what really caused it was getting that final pick, down to be the person who the third team that would win it all. Because then you get, 2 points with 2 teams where you get that full 30 points for winning an entire event. Also, I think at 10,000 Lakes, there was like a $20 prize. So we saw a lot more people there than when there wasn't any prize.
I know that we're going a little off topic here, but I feel like the hardest picks to make is that second pick. And so I feel like trying to figure out a game of, I mean, when you can kind of guess who's going to be the top first 16 robots that are going to be on the field. And it's sort of an easy thing to generally pull out. It's going to be probably all the teams in the top 12, and then maybe 4 other teams kind of between 12 and 20. It's usually, statistically speaking, I feel like most of the teams in the first robot, second robot on an alliance are going to be in those first 20 teams. I think what's really hard is how do you pull the diamonds out of the rough, and how do you find those robots that are picked as the third robot in an alliance? And that's really where the scouting data is honestly the most critical, is finding that best third robot for an alliance. And so trying to, I've, Ian's built his game, I built my game. I've been thinking about how do we focus just on those digging those robots out that maybe had a bad start to the day, but got everything worked out. And now they're awesome, but they're off everyone's radar because their points were low or something. How do you find those robots that other teams have passed over that is an excellent robot, and you pick them up as your third robot in your alliance? Because to me, I feel like that's where the really good teams that do really good scouting excel, is in finding that third robot in an alliance.
So you, hopefully I'm coming through. So you guys don't have a metric that shows whether a team is going up or down?
We don't have anything in our scouting data that would indicate that. I mean, we could look at points scored or something like that and chart that, but it's not a primary metric as far as I know. And again, I'm on the outskirts. Lexi can talk about data way better than I can.
Yeah, I know that's been something we've sort of been implementing a little bit this year through Tableau, that basically plots our match data over the match number or time. And that's been really helpful what in the final pick list meeting. Although we definitely need to do a bit more exploring when that comes. Once we start using it this year, because I know at least last year we only had like maybe 2 people really confident in the system. Although what's really cool with the system is you can pull any statistic over time. You can look at just general points, but you can also look at, like charge station, like engages, and be like, okay, here are the matches that they consistently engaged. Here are the matches that they only docked, and here's the matches where they didn't do anything. And that's been pretty helpful to see. Although we definitely haven't used it to its fullest extent.
So is this like Tableau thing? Is that just pulling from the first API and then just like having a way to see all that data?
It syncs up with Google Sheets, actually. Basically, we can import a Google Sheet. I don't know. I wasn't really the person to do this. There's some other people on the team that are a lot more into it, but I believe it was basically just pulling from our master spreadsheet with all the different data and teams, and then using that. And the spreadsheet does pull from first a little bit, but it was mostly from our match scouting data.
Dominic, are you getting a Tableau license through First as a team or nonprofit? Is that one of the benefits that First teams get?
I don't believe so. I think we're just using the free version.
The free version only goes 30 days. At least the last time I downloaded Tableau, I thought the free version was a trial period.
I don't know. Toby would know more about it.
Okay.
Toby and Dylan were doing a lot of stuff with it.
I will ask Toby the next time I talk to her. The Tableau is an amazing tool, but very, very expensive. And I didn't think the free version was unlimited free features. I thought it was a 30-day trial. Maybe I'm thinking I might be thinking of a different tool. If anyone else is looking for an analytics tool to do data analysis, Power BI, the desktop version of Power BI, so not in the cloud but locally, which is I believe how Tableau runs. Power BI is a Microsoft Office tool, and that's free for the version that runs on your laptop. And it does a lot. Tableau probably has a lot more bells and whistles, but Power BI is a similar tool that is free until you want to hook it up into the cloud and publish your reports. Then you got to pay for it.
So I guess I'll ask a question then. It's a little off topic, but what is the most unexpected thing you've learned about scouting?
I guess I'll go back to the thing I sort of alluded to earlier, is that the data is not nearly as important as the people observation and conversations between teams, either in the pit or between drive team members. I feel like we put a lot of emphasis on scouting data. And I think what surprised me as I learned more and more about scouting is that the data was really for us to sort teams into basically 3 buckets. And it seems odd to think that you put all this effort into building an app and maintaining an app and collecting the data and running it through all these Google Sheets or Excel formulas. And at the end of the day, it's just sort of a broad categorization, and you still end up going through every single team and you talk about every single team. And some you don't talk about very long, and others you talk about for a very long time. But I feel like it's a people process. It's not a data process by the time you're making your pick list.
Thanks. Yeah.
I am gonna say something. Okay. Me personally, this is my first year kind of leading anything in the team. Especially with newer teammates that this is their first FRC experience. I think it's just a little hard to reel them in to really focus for longer periods of time. I'm not saying that because they're younger, but it's more difficult because they obviously want to be in the pits doing something, looking at things other than sitting in the stands, playing from our tablet. So I think it's just more of experience attitude kind of thing of we're literally all in this together. And yeah, but I do understand for long periods of time in the stands it does get really tiring, like people get fatigued. Like, I do understand that, so we try to incorporate a lot of more active things, pit scouting for one. Yeah.
I guess I have 2. One that like really seeing at the different types of data that are required and like the specific data points. Because at kickoff, you might be like, oh, we definitely need to collect this data point. But once you get to week 0, once you get to your first competition, you're like, this data point wasn't helpful at all. And so sort of like seeing that has been really interesting. And also looking at the data and identifying what their different autos are, which is really interesting. Being like, okay, they only have one auto that they've been running this entire competition. Does that auto work with ours? Like I know, like last year, it was like, okay, they're always starting in the same position and doing this set of tasks. What if we want to start in that position? Maybe they're not the best pick for us. Whereas you have some teams which have like 4 different autos, and it's like, okay, here's all 4 different autos that we've seen in our match scouting. And then we can go up to them during like strategy discussions before matches and being like, hey, we've seen this auto that you've done and it's really cool. Can you do that with us? And it works really well. And I feel like that's a really interesting thing to see and kind of a cool way of looking at data and sort of being like, oh yeah, that is what the data is saying, not just abstract numbers.
I have questions about pit scouting. I'm glad you brought that up. I stand back and I let students talk to our students when they come and ask questions about pit scouting. I don't follow our kids around, so I don't know how our kids are doing pit scouting. But I hear a lot of teams come to our pit and ask questions, and I hear them ask questions like, "Are you Java or C++?" And I think to myself, why does that matter? And I think on the surface, when someone says, can you score high? Can you score low? Can you play defense? I think that they make sense logically, but I think a better scouting question is, what ways do you feel like you fit into an alliance to optimize the best? And the answer should be, we cycle low and we score as fast as we can low, or we score high because we feel like it scores the most points, or we can push anybody anywhere we want them to go, so we do it best if we play defense. And so I feel like a lot of teams are asking questions that it's easy to collect the data, but the data isn't very helpful. And so I don't know if this is a question for the other teams. It's more of just an observation of, I feel like a lot of teams come to the pit and they ask questions, and I almost wonder if sometimes it's, we need to give this kid a job, go have them ask these questions, and not really out there looking for what are the things that are going to tell us if this is a good fit for our alliance or not. So maybe someone has a comment on my comment, but I think it's really interesting, the questions that teams ask, and I feel like they could be better.
Yeah, I know, at least for us, one way we sort of get around that sort of like, oh, this is just a job for someone to do, is like really seeking out the people on the team that are interested in connecting with other teams and really find looking at other robots really cool, and talking with different people. And sometimes that is like our operations people that really work with a lot of our sponsors and other teams. And it's like, one of my friends who doesn't really do any of the robot stuff, he's super interested in pit scouting and he loves talking with all these different teams. And so he's willing to talk to 30 or 40 teams at a competition and, have really short conversations, but then, come back and be like, hey, you were a really cool team. I want to get to know you. And like, great friendships happen through that, and, long lasting connections that then we can pull on later. And I feel like that's one way of getting around it, is sort of identifying the students that really want to talk with other teams and are really extroverted, being interested in that. Whereas someone who isn't necessarily into, talking to other people that are strangers and are probably more wanting to just work on their robot, might not find that job as enjoyable.
Yeah, it's kind of what you said about some of the unnecessary questions. I remember I was like talking to someone one time, and they weren't going on for so long because they kept talking about how like they were trying to fix their robot at competition, and then people just came up and were asking questions that were unnecessary. But I believe, yeah, it is important to be able to have like that. You can like make connections with other teams through pit scouting, and I don't know, then maybe your team will like, I don't know, form a connection and then have an event afterwards, or both your teams go meet up and go bowling or something. And then also, as you mentioned, just kind of asking the teams important questions that you might not be able to figure out from the data.
I will, before we go here, I want to share one piece of advice. So I was a software consultant for over a decade, and generally nobody hires a consultant when things are going well. So I would go into sort of messy situations in companies to sort of fix a problem, but then of course you come in as the bad guy, and nobody really wants to talk to you and tell you what's really going on, because then that might make them look bad, and who knows, maybe they'll get fired, which never ever happens, but people have those concerns. One of the strategies that I developed when I was walking into a situation where I was trying to find out what's really the problem here and how can I help, was instead of saying what's broken, I would say, if I gave you 3 months and as many people as you could take, what would be the first 2 things you would fix? And boy, I found out immediately what was the big problems in whatever the product was, or the company, or the service, or whatever it is they were doing. Because people were like, holy cow, if you're going to give me an extra 3 months to work on this project and I can do whatever I want, this is the thing I now want to fix, because it makes me angry that every time we do anything with this, it breaks, or it's the thing I'm constantly getting called on. I want to rip the whole thing out and replace it with something new. And so I think an interesting strategy, and I've never shared this with KnightKrawler, I thought of it just now, is to go into the pits and say, if you had 2 more weeks to work in your robot, what would you do? And you might find out that, hey, this arm, we would replace this arm with something else because it breaks all the time, or we're having a really hard time controlling it. So it might, we don't want to go into teams and like figure out, why are you bad? That's not the point. The point is to figure out where you can count on teams of having bulletproof solutions, and where you might have to be careful that you don't want to put them in a situation where they're your climber, because they said they're struggling with their climbing. And so if we're going to use them, we need to use them in a different way. So that might be an interesting strategy. And it maybe goes back to my last comment about how do we ask better questions that give us more value, rather than just, can we check this box off of a list of questions? But I guess all of that comes back to, how do you build your pick list? If you build your pick list purely on data, you need those check boxes. If you're building a pick list because you're having conversations with your strategy team and saying, I talked to this team and this is what I learned, then those things become more valuable.
I also think with that, like when going into strategy discussions for matches, like going into it, first of all, introducing yourselves. I know that's a big thing that we've been really pressuring our people to be doing, because, you get to know people. But then also being like, okay, what do you want to do in this match, to all 3 of the teams? Because I feel like there's a lot of time that more experienced teams are sometimes like, hey, looking at our data, we want you to do this. But, sometimes you don't want to do that. Or sometimes you're like, well, our arm just broke. We can't do that. And so sort of having the invitation for everyone to talk and everyone to be on equal footing of, here is what we hope to do in this match, and then sort of incorporating everyone's ideas into that. And I feel like that's a really cool way to like sort of make everyone, happy with the outcome of that meeting, and sort of be engaged in that process of figuring out the strategy.
Dominic, I will say that not only is that a really cool way, but I almost feel like that should be a necessity. I've also heard stories of an alliance captain saying, we need you to do this. And it always feels bad when that happens to anybody saying, what do you want to do? And work together to find something that everybody finds a way to have success in the match in the way that they want to have success, especially in qualifications. So I mentioned earlier that we needed to play defense in 2019 if we wanted to get a shot to being picked up. I've heard of other teams saying, hey, we have to be able to highlight this thing that we have because it's our best chance of getting picked up. and another person on an alliance and qual saying, don't do that, we'll lose the match if you do that. And teams have to figure out ways to work together, but I'm so glad you brought that, Dominic, because the idea that you want to be able to say, hey, our data shows us that you're not good at this, we need to do this instead. Probably not, as you said, probably not the right approach. The right approach is probably to say, what do you want to do in this match? Here's what we want to do in the match. Can we find a way to do the things we want to do together, but also help to make sure we win the match or get the ranking points or whatever it might be. Thank you for bringing up that point. That's really important. Well, we're at 8:30. Actually, we're a little past 8:30. We all got an extra hour of sleep, but I don't think we want to keep going. So Panthenators, do you have more things that you didn't get done tonight? Anything else you were hoping to accomplish?
I think overall we were able to learn a lot and grow in our scouting capabilities. We kind of this past 2 years, we haven't really used scouting. We kind of just did it and we're like, let's just do it. And then we didn't actually use it. And then now looking at it, we're like, we probably should be using some of that data and actually improving upon those methods. So I think with all the things we've learned today, we can build off of what we have been doing. So I really appreciate everyone's input and feedback.
Yeah, you guys, this was a great topic. I'm glad you put it on the calendar. I enjoyed it. I hope everyone else did. We had a nice big crowd tonight too, compared to some other nights when we've had fewer. Did anyone else have any final comments of I wanted to make sure I make this point before we end this topic? Anyone? All right. I hope everyone here comes back and brings 7 friends for our conversation next week that Yoji Shimizu is going to do with 1816, and I forgot the other 2 teams, Sub-Zero, and I forgot the last one. Anyway, KnightKrawler uses core values in just about everything we do. We use it to communicate to sponsors, talk to our impact award, all that stuff. And we believe strongly in core values. Please come back, bring your friends. I think the core value talk is going to be one of our best of the year. So please join us next week. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.